There is a really specific texture to television in the early 1980s.
Oh, absolutely.
If you close your eyes right now and you just picture a sitcom from, say, 1980 or 1981, it's usually really bright, it's loud, and it honestly looks kind of cheap.
Yeah, it looks like it was shot in the middle of a brightly lit supermarket.
Exactly.
I mean, that's just the era of videotape. You get that harsh, almost soap opera look where everything feels a little too real, but somehow a little too flat at the exact same time.
Right, right. And then September 1982 rolls around, and NBC premieres this show about a dark, sort of subterranean bar in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
And it's brown. It's shadowy. It's really quiet compared to everything else.
Yeah, the contrast was huge.
You have this washed-up relief pitcher standing behind the bar, a graduate student who looks like she just literally walked out of a poetry reading, and a bunch of guys who are they're just sitting there.
Staring at their beers.
Yeah, just staring at their beers.
It felt like a stage play, honestly. It had this dusty, lived-in quality that was completely out of step with the glitz and the high energy of that era.
It felt cozy, but also kind of sad. Like these people didn't really have anywhere else to go in their lives.
Melancholic, that's definitely the word I'd use for it.
But clearly, America hated it, or I guess more accurately, they didn't even know it existed.
Yeah, I think hated might be way too active a word.
Right.
Hated implies that they actually tuned in, watched it, and actively rejected it.
Yeah.
The reality, which we see in the sources we're unpacking today, is much worse.
Oh, yeah. We have the Nielsen data right here in our stack of production notes and casting records.
Yeah.
And it is absolutely brutal to look at.
It really is. Premiere season, fall 1982. The show comes in at rank 74.
And that's out of what?
Out of 77 shows on television.
Wow. 74 out of 77. So it wasn't just low rated.
No.
It was statistically irrelevant. It was basically in the margin of error for the entire television industry.
It was completely invisible. I mean, if you look at the records, the only things performing worse were, I think, some obscure news magazine show and a program that had already been effectively canceled by its network.
Jeez.
So functionally speaking, this show was in dead last place.
And yet we are doing a deep dive on it today for all of you listening because it didn't just survive that awful first year.
Not at all.
It became the absolute leviathan of the 1990s. We're talking about Cheers. And the finale of Cheers had something like, wait, what was the exact number? 90 million people.
93 million viewers.
93 million, which is a number that simply does not exist in television anymore.
Never.
That is a Super Bowl number. That is a moon landing number.
It's staggering.
So our mission for today's deep dive is to figure out that delta. To unpack how a show with such a simple premise, literally just people hanging out in a bar, managed to survive cancellation, run for 11 seasons, win 28 Emmys, and fundamentally change the landscape of the American sitcom.
Right. What was the secret sauce?
Exactly. How to go from 74th place dead on arrival to the defining comedy of a generation. And, we want to go beyond the basic trivia you can find anywhere. I want to know the mechanics, what happened in the casting, how did the writing tackle real social issues, and why does a song about a place where everybody knows your name still resonate so deeply today?
Well, we really have to look at the accident.
The accidents.
Yeah, because when you dig through these production notes, the critical reception history, the oral histories we've pulled for this deep dive, you start to realize that Cheers is a show made entirely out of Plan Bs.
Really?
Literally everything. The lead actor, not their first choice.
Wow.
The setting, not the first choice. The iconic theme song, that was a backup.
Even the know-it-all character, Cliff Clavin, he wasn't even in the original script, right?
Not a single word of him. He was a total improv, an absolute fluke that happened during an audition for a completely different role.
That is just amazing. So we have this show that defied the odds, defied the ratings, and frankly defied the logic of what a sitcom was supposed to be in the early 80s. Where do we even start to break this down?
I think we have to start with the creators and their original concept. Because before it was this moody, subterranean Boston bar, the show was almost set in a hotel.
A hotel, like Fawlty Towers.
Exactly like Fawlty Towers.
Interesting.
The creative team behind the show, Glenn and Les Charles and James Burrows, they were huge fans of that British model of television. They really wanted that trapped pressure cooker environment that a hotel provides.
Just to give you all listening some context on these guys, Glenn and Les Charles and James Burrows, they had this really specific, kind of funny way of describing their own partnership, didn't they?
They did, yeah. They famously called themselves Two Mormons and a Jew.
Which honestly sounds like the setup to a joke you'd hear sitting at the bar in Cheers.
It does. But it's actually really crucial to understanding the unique voice of the show.
How so?
Well, the Charles brothers were from the West. They were raised Mormon, very grounded, very salt-of-the-earth guys. And then you have Burrows, who was the son of Abe Burrows, a legendary playwright and director.
All right.
So Burrows was basically theater royalty. He grew up in that world.
Yeah.
So you have this collision of the outsider perspective of the Charles brothers and the insider coastal sophistication of Burrows.
So they brought different flavors to the table.
Exactly. And they wanted to create something that felt genuinely smart. They looked at the TV landscape at the time shows like The Love Boat or Three's Company, which, they were fun. They were popular.
They were fluff.
Total fluff. They were very light. This team wanted to do something with the energy of a Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn movie.
So they wanted that classic screwball comedy feel. Fast dialogue, heavy sexual tension, high emotional stakes between the leads.
Right. And initially they thought a hotel was the perfect place to do it. But they ran into a major structural problem almost immediately during development.
I think I can guess what it is. In a hotel, the guests eventually have to leave.
They check out, exactly.
Yeah.
You cannot build a long-term emotional relationship with a guest character because by the end of the half-hour episode, they're gone.
Right.
And if you just keep bringing the same guests back every week, it gets really weird really fast. The audience starts asking, why is this guy staying at this random hotel for 3 straight months?
Yeah, unless you're going for some sort of full surrealism, you need a logical reason for people to stay in one room.
Exactly. So they realized they needed a place where people naturally lingered, a place where you could have your core cast trapped together, meaning the employees, but where strangers could wander in and out, and regulars could essentially live there without it being weird.
And that logic led them directly to the idea of a neighborhood tavern.
It did. And specifically, if we look at their production notes, they were heavily influenced by an old radio program.
Oh, right. I saw a note here in our sources about Duffy's Tavern.
Yes. This is such a great deep cut. Duffy's Tavern was this incredibly popular radio show from the 1940s, and the premise was functionally identical to Cheers.
Really?
Yeah. It centered around a bartender, a colorful cast of regulars, and this prevailing philosophy of the average man. The creators realized that a bar operates as what sociologists call a third place.
A third place, meaning it's not your work and it's not your home.
Right. It's the place you go to actively avoid both of those other places.
Which makes perfect sense and actually explains why the set design looks the way it does. We talked earlier about it being dark and shadowy. They didn't want a bright TV bar. They wanted a hideout.
Exactly. They actively scouted real physical bars to get that specific vibe, and their location scouting is fascinating. They looked in Barstow, California.
Like Barstow?
Yeah, out in the desert. They also seriously looked at Kansas City, Missouri.
Why not just set the show in Kansas City? Or Barstow, for that matter.
Yeah.
Why Boston?
Well, they considered it. But as they developed the characters, they realized they needed a city that had a very specific demographic mix.
Dope.
They needed a place where a blue-collar, working-class, factory worker or mailman could sit directly next to a Harvard professor or a wealthy academic, and the audience wouldn't question it. It had to feel organic.
And Boston is basically the capital of that exact dynamic.
Boston. It's a massive college town filled with elite institutions, but at its core, it's also a very tough working-class port city.
Right.
It was the perfect petri dish for the kind of class war they ultimately wanted to write about.
Okay, so they have the concept down. They have the city chosen. Now they need the actual physical look of the place.
Mm-hmm.
And this brings us to the famous exterior shot.
The Bull and Finch Pub in Beacon Hill.
They found it in a phone book, didn't they?
Literally just flipping through the yellow pages.
Yeah.
They were looking for something that looked English, but still authentically American. They saw the little ad for the Bull and Finch, liked the typography of the logo, and just drove over to see it. And when they got there, they particularly liked the stairs. The fact that the entrance required you to go down a flight of stairs from the street level.
It looked like you were descending into a cave, like a literal hideout.
Exactly. So they approached the owner.
And the deal they made with this owner, this just kills me.
Tom Kershaw.
Right, Tom Kershaw. They go up to this guy and they say, hey, we're making a TV show. We want to use the exterior shot of your bar, just the outside. We're going to film the inside on a soundstage in L.A. And he says, sure.
Mm-hmm.
How much did they actually pay him for those rights?
$1 single.
$1. I cannot get over that.
A crisp $1 bill. And to be completely fair to Tom Kershaw, literally nobody knew this show was going to be a hit. It came in 74th place. Probably just thought, hey, free dollar and maybe a little local exposure.
Right, right.
But that $1 rights deal eventually turned the Bull and Finch into the third most visited tourist attraction in all of Boston.
Unbelievable.
We are talking millions and millions of dollars in merchandise. T-shirts, mugs, burgers, hats, all from a $1 contract.
I really hope he framed that dollar bill.
I think he probably framed the massive bank account statements that started rolling in a few years later.
Fair enough. Okay, so we have the physical place. Now we need to populate it. We need the people. And this is where the whole Plan B narrative of this deep dive really takes over the story.
Oh, heavily.
Let's talk about Sam Malone, because for me, and I think for almost anyone listening, Ted Danson just is Sam Malone. They are inseparable in pop culture. It is genuinely hard to imagine anyone else standing behind that bar.
Absolutely.
But looking at the casting notes we have, wow, it is a completely different picture.
It's a multiverse of madness, honestly. It really is.
First off, Sam wasn't even a baseball player in the initial pitch.
No, not at all. In the original pilot script, the character of Sam was a former lineman for the New England Patriots.
A football player.
A football player. And because of that, the character was written as heavier, broader, much more of a classic meat and potatoes kind of guy.
And the network NBC, in their infinite wisdom, they had a very specific name in mind for this role.
They wanted Bill Cosby.
Stop. That breaks my brain every time I read it.
I am completely serious. The executives at NBC formally recommended Bill Cosby for the role of Sam Malone.
That is just aside from all the obvious retrospective reasons regarding Cosby's later life and legacy. Just think about the sheer energy of that choice.
Right.
Bill Cosby in the early 80s was the ultimate authority figure. He was rapidly becoming America's dad. He was always in control of the room.
Exactly, and that fundamental trait would have instantly killed the premise of the show, because the whole point of Sam Malone is that he cannot be in control.
Right.
Sam Malone is, at his core, a loser. He's a recovering alcoholic. He's a womanizer who constantly strikes out and makes a fool of himself. He's a guy whose absolute best glory days are at least 10 years behind him. If you put a natural winner, an authority figure like Cosby in that role, all that necessary vulnerability just vanishes. The character doesn't work.
So the creators obviously pushed back against the network on that. Who else did they seriously look at?
They got really, really close to casting Fred Dryer.
Wait, the actual NFL player?
Yeah. He played defensive end for the Rams. He was transitioning into acting at the time. He famously went on to do the cop show Hunter a few years later.
Oh, right.
And Dryer was actually great in the auditions. He fit that original football player mold perfectly. He was tall. He was imposing. He looked like a guy who used to tackle people for a living.
There's always a but.
But he just wasn't funny. Is that a fair way to put it?
I mean, he was a tough guy.
Right. He was a genuine tough guy. He simply didn't possess that frantic, slightly pathetic, neurotic energy underneath the surface that the comedy required.
And then in walks Ted Danson.
Right. Who was absolutely not a football player.
Not even a little bit.
No. He was tall, but he was lanky. He had this amazing, thick head of hair, but he didn't look like an NFL lineman at all. But Danson had something the other actors didn't have. He had incredible range.
He could play both sides.
Exactly. He could be the cool, swaggering jock when he needed to be, but he was totally willing and able to be the complete butt of the joke a second later.
So once they cast Danson, they realized they had to change the sport to fit him.
They did. They looked at Danson's body type and realized football just didn't make visual sense anymore. So they made Sam a relief pitcher, which, if you think about it narratively, is actually a much better fit for the show.
How so is the difference?
Think about the psychology of the sports. A football player is just one piece of a massive team machine. But a relief pitcher, that is a deeply lonely position.
Oh, I see.
You sit all by yourself out in the bullpen for hours. You come into the game at the very end. You either save the game and become the hero, or you blow it and take all the blame. And then you go sit back down alone.
Mayday Malone.
Exactly. It perfectly mirrors the psychology of a lonely guy standing behind a bar every night.
But there was a pretty funny catch with Danson, wasn't there? About the baseball thing.
Oh, yeah. Ted Danson knew absolutely nothing about the game of baseball.
Zero.
Less than zero. He had never even been to a professional game. He didn't know how to properly hold a fielder's glove.
That's hilarious.
He literally had to go to a specialized baseball school just to learn how to stand and walk like a professional athlete. And he had to go to bartending school, too, because he had no idea how to pour beer either.
See, that is the true magic trick of acting, isn't it? He played that sort of washed-up athletic arrogance so flawlessly that I just always assumed he was a jock in real life.
That's the Burrows touch shining through, which we'll get into later. But honestly, the real casting hurdle wasn't finding Sam. It was finding Diane.
Shelley Long.
Shelley Long. The casting directors actually wrote a note on her file that said she was the easiest choice and the hardest get.
Meaning she didn't want to do the show?
Well, she was a movie actress at the time, or at least she heavily aspired to be exclusively a film actress. You have to remember, doing a television sitcom in 1982 was widely viewed as a massive step down for your career if you had any kind of feature film aspirations.
Right. The landscape was totally different back then. TV was the minor leagues.
Exactly. So she really had to be coaxed and convinced just to show up and read for the part.
But once she was finally in the room, it all came down to the chemistry tests. I was reading about this part of the process. According to the records, they took the final 3 actors up for Sam and the final 3 actresses up for Diane, and they just systematically mixed and matched them to see what happened.
Right. So you ended up with these incredible what-if pairings that could have changed television history. Imagine this one. Fred Dryer and Julia Duffy.
Julia Duffy. She was the actress from Newhart, right? The one who played the really rich, spoiled princess character.
Yes, exactly. So imagine a hulking, legitimate NFL tough guy opposite a tiny, wealthy princess type.
I mean, that's a funny dynamic for a show, maybe, but it's definitely not Cheers.
No. Then you had another pairing they tested, William Devane and Lisa Eichhorn.
William Devane. That would have been dark. Or at least very dramatic.
Probably way too serious.
Mm-hmm.
Devane brings a very intense, dramatic energy to his roles. He wouldn't have had the bounce a sitcom needs.
And then finally, they paired Ted Danson and Shelley Long.
And the producers noted that the literal air in the room changed. It wasn't just that they had romantic chemistry, which they absolutely did. It was that they had what the team called combat chemistry.
Combat chemistry. I really like that phrase.
It's perfect. They genuinely seemed to annoy the hell out of each other, but were simultaneously incredibly attracted to each other, and that contradiction is the entire engine of the show.
It's not a simple I love you story.
No, it's I cannot stand you, I think you're an idiot, but I also can't leave this room.
Okay, so you have your 2 anchors locked in. But a bar needs regulars. It needs an ecosystem. And this is where that Plan B theme we talked about really shines brightly. Let's talk about George Wendt. The man, the myth. He wasn't even supposed to be a main character at all.
Not even close. On the original casting sheet, his role was just listed as George, with a small g, practically. He was essentially just a featured extra.
Really?
The pilot script just called for Diane on her very first day as a waitress to serve her first customer, this guy George. And he had exactly 1 line of dialogue.
Let me guess the line.
Beer.
That's it? Just the word beer.
That was his entire audition material. He had to walk into the room, sit down, look generally miserable, and say the word beer.
How does an actor even crush an audition with only 1 word?
By doing exactly what George Wendt did. He didn't just speak the word. He sighed it out of his body. He managed to put the weight of the entire world into that single syllable.
Wow.
It was the authentic sound of a man who has had a terrible day, a terrible week, maybe a terrible decade, and he just needs this one specific thing to cope. The producers laughed so hard at his delivery that they immediately turned to each other and realized, okay, this guy needs to be sitting on that stool every single week.
And then there's John Ratzenberger. Honestly, this might be my favorite story in this entire stack of research.
It is absolute Hollywood legend. So Ratzenberger actually came in to audition for the exact same roles George Wendt. He auditioned for Norm.
He wanted to be the beer guy.
He did, but he walked out of the audition room knowing in his gut that he didn't get the part. He could just tell that Wendt had crushed it and the role was gone. But instead of just getting in his car and driving home, he stopped at the door, turned back around, and looked at the creators.
He just turned around.
And he said to them, hey, do you guys have a bar know-it-all?
That is such an incredibly bold move for an actor, just inventing a brand new role for yourself in the exit interview.
It takes serious nerve. The producers were kind of confused and said, what do you mean by a bar know-it-all? And Ratzenberger just launches into this improvised pitch. He explains that every neighborhood bar in America has this one specific guy who thinks he knows everything about everything, but actually knows absolutely nothing.
The guy who aggressively explains how a carburetor works, but has never actually owned a car in his life.
Exactly. And he didn't just explain the concept, he just dropped into the character right then and there.
On the spot.
Totally on the spot. He started spouting these completely nonsense facts about, I think it was biology or maybe geography, just complete authoritative gibberish delivered with absolute unwavering confidence.
And it worked.
The producers were crying laughing. They went home and wrote the character of Cliff Clavin into the pilot script that very night.
It's just genius because Cliff and Norm ultimately act as this grounding wire for the whole series. You have all this high emotional drama with Sam and Diane screaming at each other in the office about French literature and sports, and then the camera just cuts to Cliff, calmly explaining to Norm how buffalo migrate across the plains.
They serve as the Greek chorus of the show. They are there to constantly remind the audience that at the end of the day, no matter what's happening, this is just a bar. None of the drama happening here is actually that important in the grand scheme of things.
I want to pivot to the writing for a second because, we look back at Cheers now and we mostly think about the will they, won't they dynamic. We think of it as a romance. But the source material makes a really compelling, deeper point. Cheers wasn't actually a romantic comedy. It was a class war.
Oh, absolutely it was. If you strip away the jokes and the sitcom structure, it is fundamentally a show about the collision between the American working class and the American intellectual elite.
With Diane representing the elite.
Diane is the pure embodiment of the elite. She's a perpetual graduate student. She reads Proust for fun. She casually drops words like corporeal and verisimilitude into everyday bar conversation. She represents this ideal that life should constantly be elevated and analyzed. And crucially, she firmly believes she is better than the bar and everyone in it.
And Sam is the opposite.
Sam is the ultimate populist. He values street smarts. He values physical ability and charm. He genuinely thinks sitting around reading heavy books is a waste of time for people who can't actually do things in the real world.
So when these two are fighting, and they fight constantly, they aren't really arguing about who forgot to do the dishes or who looked at who. They are fighting about what actually has value in American society.
Precisely. There's this brilliantly written episode early on where they try to go out to the opera together, and Sam falls asleep in the theater.
Right.
And Diane is just horrified. But she's not mad because he's tired. She's furious because his boredom is a direct insult to her entire high-culture worldview. And on the flip side, Sam is annoyed because he's convinced she's just faking her enjoyment of the opera just to look smarter than everyone else.
And the truly brilliant thing about the writing here is that the show never actually takes a side.
That is the magic key to Cheers. Think about it. Most sitcoms would lazily make Diane the designated smart one and Sam the designated dumb one. Or alternatively, they'd make Sam the cool, relatable guy and Diane the stuck-up villain.
The Cheers did both.
Yes. Diane was terribly stuck up and pretentious. But she was also factually right a lot of the time. Sam was uneducated and superficial. But he possessed a deep emotional intelligence and loyalty that Diane completely lacked.
They constantly exposed each other's deepest hypocrisies.
Which is exactly why their relationship was able to drive the narrative for 5 solid seasons. If the plot was just, he thinks she's pretty and she thinks he's handsome, the audience gets bored in 6 episodes. But because the dynamic was, he fundamentally challenges her reason for existing, it can last forever.
And surrounding this massive ideological clash, you have the rest of the bar, the quote-unquote family.
Right.
We mentioned Norm and Cliff, but we really have to talk about Coach and Carla.
Right. Nicholas Colasanto, who played Coach, he was the absolute heart of the bar.
Yeah.
The character was, frankly, borderline senile due to taking way too many baseballs to the head without a batting helmet over the years.
Yeah.
But he was the sweet, trusting, emotional center that grounded the cynicism of everyone else.
And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have Rhea Perlman playing Carla Tortelli.
The ultimate cynic. If Coach was the warm heart of the bar, Carla was the sharp teeth. She despised Diane from day one. And that was a vital dynamic for the writers because, honestly, the audience sometimes hated Diane, too.
Carla was the pressure valve.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She was the audience surrogate, constantly rolling her eyes at Diane's endless pretension so the viewers didn't have to.
And looking at her character notes, there was this constant running gag about her fertility and having 1 million kids.
That was out of pure necessity. Rhea Perlman just kept getting pregnant in real life during production, so rather than hiding her behind a counter with a giant purse, the writers just wrote it into the script. Carla was seemingly always pregnant, which perfectly added to her constant stress, her anger, and her deep cynicism about life.
We do have to touch on a really sad, pivotal moment in the show's history, though. Moving into the middle seasons, the death of Nicholas Colasanto.
Yeah, this is a very heavy part of the show's legacy. Colasanto had a severe heart condition, and if you watch season 3 closely, you can actually see it happening on screen. Yeah, he's losing a lot of weight. He's visibly struggling to catch his breath during longer scenes. It was tough. He eventually passed away from a heart attack in 1985.
Now, in a standard television sitcom, usually when an actor leaves a show or tragically passes away, the writers take the easy way out. They just have a character say, oh, he moved to Florida to live with his sister, or he got a new job in another state.
Right, they just sweep it under the rug. But the writers on Cheers felt that doing that would be a profound insult to the character of Coach.
Because Coach loved those people.
Exactly. Coach would never, ever voluntarily pack up and leave his friends. They were his whole life. So the creators made the incredibly difficult decision to just address the death openly.
This was the season 4 opener.
The season 4 opener, they come right out and acknowledge that Coach has passed away. It was an incredibly brave, creative choice for a light comedy in the mid-'80s to just grind to a halt and say to the audience, our friend died and we are grieving.
It really grounded the show. It firmly reminded everyone that this wasn't just a live-action cartoon. These were supposed to be real people.
And structurally, it led directly to the introduction of Woody Harrelson.
Woody Boyd.
The pen pal from Hanover, Indiana.
Though, wait, didn't the show make a joke that they didn't actually exchange letters? They literally just mailed physical pens back and forth.
Yes, that is exactly the level of intellect we are dealing with here.
Classic.
So Woody Harrelson comes in to take over the required dumb guy slot behind the bar, but he played it with a completely different energy.
How so?
Well, Coach was old and befuddled. Woody was young, incredibly optimistic, and just dangerously naive.
Ah.
And that subtle shift changed the entire dynamic for Sam. Instead of Sam interacting with an older father figure or a peer, Sam suddenly became Woody's protective big brother.
It freshened up the chemistry.
It did. But the biggest, most dangerous shakeup the show would ever face was still coming. Season 5 ends, and Shelley Long announces she is leaving the show.
This is the moment where, historically, 99% of television shows just die.
Instantly.
You lose your female lead. You lose literally 50% of the Sam and Diane dynamic that made the show a hit in the first place. By all conventional logic, Cheers should have been over.
So how did they survive it? They completely reinvented the genre of the show. They brought in Kirstie Alley to play Rebecca Howe.
Yeah.
And the sheer brilliance of this move was that they did not try to find another Diane.
Right. They didn't cast another blonde, poetry-reading academic.
No. Rebecca was the total opposite. She was a ruthless corporate climber. The corporation she works for buys the bar, so she comes in as Sam's direct superior. She is his boss.
The power dynamic flipped.
Entirely. And initially, for the first few episodes, she was presented as this icy, hyper-competent, untouchable businesswoman. But then
the writers broke her.
They absolutely destroyed her. Over the course of that season, they slowly peeled back the layers and revealed that underneath the shoulder pads, she was a complete neurotic mess. She was a total disaster in her personal life. She was deeply insecure. She was essentially a gold digger, but she was spectacularly bad at digging for gold. Every rich man she went after turned out to be a creep or rejected her.
Which made her character incredibly funny, but in a totally different way than Diane.
Exactly. And that shift fundamentally changed the DNA of the series. It shifted from being a tense romantic comedy into a sprawling ensemble farce.
The burden wasn't solely on Sam anymore.
Right. It wasn't just about will they or won't they sleep together anymore. It was about this group of lovable lunatics trying to desperately run a business and survive their own bad decisions. And that pivot gave the show another 6 solid years of life on the network.
Let's shift gears and talk about the actual production style, because we touched on the visual look of the show earlier in the intro, but there was a very specific technical reason why Cheers feels so different when you watch it today compared to its peers.
It's the great film versus tape war of the 1980s.
Break that down for me like I'm a 5-year-old. What does that actually mean?
Okay. In the 80s, network sitcoms were almost universally shot on videotape. Think of the visual look of All in the Family, or The Golden Girls, or Family Ties.
Okay, I can picture that. It's very bright.
Right. Videotape is incredibly cheap to use. It's very easy to edit on a quick weekly turnaround. but it has a very distinct, flat, harsh aesthetic.
Yeah.
It looks like the local evening news. It looks very immediate, like it's happening right now.
And film. What does film do?
Film has actual physical texture. It has grain. It captures and handles shadows beautifully. It looks like a proper movie. And subconsciously, it feels timeless to the viewer.
Okay.
The creators, and especially the director James Burrows, aggressively insisted on shooting Cheers on actual film. NBC hated the idea because film costs significantly more money to process, but Burrows dug his heels in and fought for it.
And we are so lucky he did because of that choice. You can queue up an episode of Cheers today on a modern streaming service in high definition, and it looks rich and beautiful. It doesn't look like some degraded historical artifact.
Exactly. The film stock gave the wooden bar set this incredible, inviting warmth. And beyond just the camera format, you have what the industry calls the Burrows touch in the actual directing.
He was famously obsessed with motion on the set, right?
He was fanatic about it. He had a strict, unbreakable rule for his actors. Nobody plays a scene without a prop.
Meaning you can't just stand on your mark and deliver your dialogue?
Right. You can't just stand still like you're in a school play. You have to be doing something physical while you speak. Wiping down the mahogany counter, carrying a heavy crate of liquor from the back room, pouring a draft beer, fixing a broken bar stool.
It adds kinetic energy to the frame.
Burrows deeply believed that comedy lives inside the body. If Sam Malone is feeling nervous in a scene, he shouldn't just deliver a line saying, "I'm nervous." He should be aggressively, frantically drying a beer mug with a towel until it practically squeaks.
It basically makes the bar feel like a legitimate, functioning workplace, rather than just a stage set.
It does.
Yeah.
And he cultivated this environment where the background actors, the extras sitting at the tables, were treated as absolutely essential to the illusion. He would tell his camera operators, the camera is a spy.
A spy.
Meaning the camera is always watching everything. So even if Norm isn't the one speaking in a scene, if he happens to be visible in the background out of focus, he still needs to be actively reacting and performing.
It creates a living, breathing ecosystem.
It does. It was revolutionary for sitcoms.
And we cannot possibly talk about the production of this show without talking about the music.
Yeah.
I guarantee everyone listening right now just heard those first 3 piano notes playing in their head the second I mentioned it.
Oh, it's completely Pavlovian at this point.
Where everybody knows your name. The ultimate TV theme song. But again, going back to our theme for today, this was a plan B.
Actually, it was Plan C.
Really?
Yeah. The songwriters they hired, Gary Portnoy and Judy Hart-Angelo, they initially wrote and submitted a song called My Kind of People.
And the producers?
Rejected it outright. So they went back to the drawing board and wrote a second song called Another Day.
Also rejected.
Rejected again.
The producers clearly knew exactly what they wanted, didn't they?
They did. They kept kicking the songs back and telling the writers, look, this show isn't about drinking beer. It's about the feeling of belonging somewhere.
The concept of the likable losers.
Right. They told the songwriters they wanted a song that sounded like it was being sung by a lonely guy at 11 o'clock at night who just really doesn't want to go home to his empty apartment. So finally they wrote, where everybody knows your name, and if you actually pay close attention to the lyrics in the verses, they are quite dark.
Making your way in the world today takes everything you've got.
Exactly. Taking a break from all your worries sure would help a lot. It's fundamentally a song about exhaustion. It's about the daily grind of the world just beating you down. And then the soaring chorus offers the only antidote. Go to the place where you are known.
It's essentially a promise to the viewer. You are safe here.
And that is exactly why the show resonated. Because 1982 was a pretty scary, stressful time in America. You had a recession, you had intense Cold War anxiety, people wanted a bunker to hide in. Cheers was the ultimate television bunker.
And before that comforting song even played, you had the cold opens, the teasers.
Oh, the cold opens were so unique for the time. Often, that little 2-minute scene before the opening credits rolled had absolutely nothing to do with the main plot of the episode.
It was almost like a sketch comedy bit.
Exactly. It was a clever way for the writers to burn off extra standalone jokes or physical gags that were too good to throw away, but didn't naturally fit into the narrative.
But strategically, it trained the audience.
It taught the audience that they had to pay attention the absolute second the show started because they were guaranteed a solid laugh in the first 30 seconds.
Now, we've talked a lot about the fun stuff, the mechanics of the comedy.
Yeah.
But looking at our source notes, Cheers was actually not afraid to get remarkably real. It tackled several social issues that were considered highly taboo for a comedy in 1982.
First and foremost on that list, alcoholism.
which is such a bold, almost counterintuitive choice for a show set entirely inside a bar.
Sam Malone is a recovering alcoholic. That isn't just a quirky character trait. It is his defining psychological struggle. He owns and operates a bar. He pours drinks for 8 hours a day, but he cannot take a single sip.
That is literally a Greek tragedy setup.
It's the myth of Tantalus, right? The guy standing in a pool of water that recedes every time he tries to drink. And the show treated his addiction with deep respect. It wasn't a punchline. There were several dramatic moments where Sam almost fell off the wagon due to stress.
And didn't he actually relapse later on?
He did in the final season. And the writers didn't treat it as a joke. They treated it as a profound, serious struggle for his soul.
And then there's the episode from season 1 titled The Boys in the Bar. Keep in mind, everyone, this aired in 1982.
This is a massive landmark moment in television history. In the episode, an old friend of Sam's comes into the bar and eventually comes out to him as gay.
Now, in 1982, the standard sitcom playbook would be to make the gay character an exaggerated stereotype, or to have the main cast react with a sort of moral disgust that the audience at home is implicitly supposed to agree with.
Right. It would usually end in some sort of panic in the bar scenario.
And there was panic in the bar in this episode, right?
There was, but the show flips the script entirely. Norm and Cliff and the other regulars start freaking out. They get paranoid that Cheers is going to become known as a gay bar and their sanctuary will be ruined. But the brilliance is that the joke isn't on the gay character.
The joke is on the regulars.
Exactly. The script is openly mocking Norm and Clark's homophobia and their fragile masculinity.
That is a huge, important distinction.
It actually won a GLA Media Award. It was incredibly progressive for the time to look at middle America and say, hey, the people panicking about gay people existing, they are the idiots in this scenario.
It's fascinating how the show handled feminism during its run, too. We talked about Diane earlier, but she wasn't the only lens they used.
No, they had a whole spectrum of feminist perspective. Diane was the highly educated academic feminist who quoted feminist literature. But then you had Carla, who was the gritty working-class pragmatist. She didn't have time for theory. She just knew she didn't need a man to validate her. She just needed a paycheck to feed her kids.
And then Frasier's wife, Lilith.
Lilith was the ultimate professional equal. She operated in male-dominated academic spaces and dominated them.
And Sam was the foil bouncing off all of them.
Sam was the aging chauvinist. He was the dinosaur trying to survive the meteor of the feminist movement. But importantly, the writers almost always framed Sam's chauvinist behavior as a character flaw, not a virtue.
Right. He was frequently the butt of the joke because of his relentless womanizing.
He was a Lothario, sure, and he scored a lot of dates, but it rarely brought him any actual happiness. By the end of the series, he basically has a moment where he admits he's essentially a sex addict. The show didn't necessarily endorse his lifestyle. It displayed it as the exact thing keeping him from being a complete, happy human being.
It's a really delicate tightrope to walk, making a notorious womanizer the likable hero of your show while simultaneously critiquing his entire worldview.
It really only worked because Ted Danson played him with such intense vulnerability. You always knew that Sam was compensating for a deep inner sadness.
All right, let's fast forward a bit in the timeline. We started this deep dive talking about the show being dead last, 74th place, complete failure. How on earth did we get from that point to the massive 90s juggernaut it became?
The turning point, surprisingly, was the summer off-season.
Reruns.
Specifically Thursday night reruns. The head of programming at NBC at the time was a guy named Brandon Tartikoff, and he passionately believed in the creative quality of Cheers. He absolutely refused to cancel it, despite the horrible ratings.
Good for him.
So in the summer of 1983, when all the other networks were airing garbage and there was no new competition, NBC just stubbornly kept airing Cheers reruns.
It's basically a strategy of attrition. We're going to keep broadcasting this show into your living room until you sit down and like it.
And it worked. People were home, they were flipping channels out of summer boredom, and they finally stopped and listened to the dialogue. They got completely hooked on the underlying tension of the Sam and Diane storyline. When season 2 premiered that fall, the ratings massively jumped.
Right.
And they just kept climbing. By season 9, it was the undisputed #1 show in America.
And that leads us to the finale, which, I mean, those numbers are just staggering to look at today.
May 20th, 1993. The series finale drew 93 million viewers.
I just want to pause and put that in context for everyone listening. That is nearly 1/3 of the entire United States population at that time, all sitting down at the exact same hour to watch the exact same thing.
It aired right after the season finale of Seinfeld, too. It was essentially a national holiday. Bars across the country hosted viewing parties.
And the awards shelf for the creators must have been literally buckling under the weight.
117 Emmy nominations over its run. 28 wins. But this is the most impressive stat. It was officially nominated for Outstanding Comedy Series for all 11 seasons it was on the air.
That kind of sustained critical consistency over a decade is almost unheard of in television.
It's incredibly rare.
But the reality is, the show didn't really end in 1993, did it? Because the Cheers-averse immediately expanded.
The cultural footprint, the Cheers effect, was massive. First, obviously, you have the direct spin-offs. Everyone knows Frasier.
Which was arguably just as critically and commercially successful as the parent show.
Yep.
They moved Kelsey Grammer's character to Seattle, completely changed his surrounding cast, and it ran for another 11 seasons.
Which is just insane when you think about his origins. Frasier Crane was initially written to be a minor, temporary roadblock character. He was just Diane's rebound guy to keep her and Sam apart for a few episodes.
And he ended up being continuously on television for 20 consecutive years. But before the massive success of Frasier, there was a pretty big failure, wasn't there?
Yes.
The Tortellas.
Right. Carla's sleazy ex-husband, Nick Tortelli, got his own spin-off show.
He did, and it did not go well.
No.
It was swiftly canceled after just 13 episodes. Critics hated it. It was heavily criticized for leaning into cheap Italian-American stereotypes, and honestly, the characters were just fundamentally unpleasant to spend 30 minutes with without the grounding presence of the Cheers bar to balance them out.
A rare swing and a miss for that creative team.
Then later you had Wings, which technically existed in the exact same television universe. Characters from Cheers like Cliff and Norm would occasionally pop up at the Nantucket airport on that show.
But the pop culture legacy goes way beyond just official network spin-offs. I'm a bit of a video gamer in my spare time, and I was absolutely delighted to find this little detail buried in our source notes. Fallout 4.
Yes, the massive post-apocalyptic video game.
The game is set in the irradiated ruins of Boston. And if you explore the wasteland, you can actually find a ruined pub called the Prost Bar. And Prost, of course, is a German word used for cheers.
Right, and if you walk inside this ruined building in the game, it is an exact, loving, physical replica of the Cheers set layout. But the developers added a really dark, brilliant little detail. There are two posed skeletons permanently sitting at the corner of the bar, right where Norm and Cliff sat for 11 years.
And one of the skeletons is still wearing a tattered U.S. mailman uniform.
It is a very grim but very touching tribute.
And references to the show are just everywhere. The Simpsons famously spoofed the premise with the Flaming Moe's episode, and they had an episode where almost the entire original cast came in to voice their animated characters.
How I Met Your Mother had that running, swirly gag that ended with the theme song. Even in modern cartoons, like Adventure Time the Ice King character, whose mind has been destroyed by magic, routinely sings the Cheers theme song to himself as a coping mechanism because it's the only comforting thing he remembers from the world before the apocalypse.
That is actually profoundly sad. The idea that where everybody knows your name is the very last scrap of humanity you cling to when the world ends.
It speaks perfectly to the ultimate comfort level of the show.
And meanwhile, in the real world, the actual physical bar in Boston is still there, operating every day.
It is. It eventually officially rebranded itself as Cheers Beacon Hill to capitalize on the tourism. But the show became such a massive cultural force during its run that actual real-life political figures wanted to be seen there.
Real politicians.
Oh yeah, John Kerry, Michael Dukakis, even Tip O'Neill, who was the sitting Speaker of the House at the time. They all made cameo appearances on the show playing themselves. It was a definitive signal that Cheers had become a true Boston institution. It was seen as being just as culturally important to the city as the Red Sox or the Boston Tea Party.
That is wild. So let's try to bring this all home. We've unpacked the bumpy history, the crazy casting what-ifs, the visual style, the deep social themes. But at the end of the day, why does it endure? Why are we sitting here deeply analyzing a sitcom that went off the air over 30 years ago?
I think it really comes down to its pioneering concept of the found family. Cheers wasn't actually a show about drinking beer.
No.
It was a show about a random group of people from completely different, isolated walks of life. A mailman who lives with his mother, a snooty psychiatrist, a bitter waitress, an aging ex-athlete who inexplicably found each other and accepted each other.
Even though they didn't always actually like each other.
They almost never liked each other. They insulted each other constantly, but they accepted each other's flaws, and most importantly, they always showed up. Every single day.
That famous line from the song, where everybody knows your name, it's not just a lyric, it's a powerful emotional promise.
It is. And there is a really profound, somewhat beautiful irony in the final scene of the finale. Think about Sam Malone's entire arc. He spends 11 seasons desperately chasing women, chasing social status, constantly trying to find the one to make his life complete. And in the very final moments of the series, after everyone else has gone home, he realizes that his true love isn't Diane. It isn't Rebecca. It isn't any woman.
It's the bar itself.
It's the physical bar and the community of people inside it. The last scene is someone knocking on the door from the street after hours, and Sam just looks up and says, "Sorry, we're closed." He straightens a picture, walks to the back room, and chooses the sanctuary of the place over the chaos of the world outside.
Which is actually a really beautiful, slightly melancholic, but incredibly honest ending.
It is. It's the absolute perfect resolution for that specific character.
Well, before we wrap up today's deep dive, I have a final, slightly provocative thought for all of you listening to Chew On. Earlier, we talked about how Cheers basically popularized the serialized storyline in comedy, that long will they, won't they narrative arc that spanned across multiple seasons.
Right.
Now, according to the notes, the creator Les Charles actually deeply regretted starting that trend later in his life. He feared that those long serialized stories actively alienated casual viewers who might just be tuning in for the first time.
He really thought it made the barrier to entry too high. He wanted the episodes to be purely episodic. You watch one, you get a complete story, you go to bed.
Exactly. But if you look at how we consume television today, in the modern age of Netflix and Hulu and obsessive binge watching, was Cheers accidentally the grandfather of the modern streaming model?
Oh, that is a fascinating connection to make.
Right. Did they inadvertently train audiences in the 80s to expect and demand long-form, complex character storytelling in their half-hour comedies?
I mean, you really can't watch a show like The Office or Parks and Recreation today without intimately understanding the long, multi-season relationship arcs. Cheers basically proved to the Nervous Network executives that audiences were actually smart enough to stick around for the long haul. They were executing complex, bingeable narrative arcs decades before the technology even existed to actually binge them.
Maybe that is exactly why the show still works so seamlessly today. It was accidentally built for the future of television. It's definitely something to think about the next time you finish a season of a comedy and immediately hit that next episode button. And with that, that is all for our deep dive into the fascinating, shadowy world of Cheers.
Thanks so much for listening, everyone.
Cheers!